you all for coming. I will try to fill Celeste's shoes tonight. She is unable to join us, so forgive me if I sound a little bit. My name is Willyn Miller, and I work for the Estes Valley Watershed Coalition. Sorry, I'll get that closer. You can see our mission up here. We work with projects that are concerned with keeping the waterways healthy, helping keep our forests healthy, and then also we have some board members who are really awesome about wildlife education. We have a great talk tonight that is about one of our big projects. This project was started post-flood. The initial phase was completed in 2018. Is that right? And we have since subsequently worked on the project in 2022, 23, all the way through this year. So before I hand it over to Karin, just wanted to let you know we've got a few events coming up. So we've got next week a midsummer roundup. If anybody would like to come join us, we'll have board members there. You can come chat, learn more about the organization, learn more about our projects and what we do. We also have a tour, a Beaver Meadow Restoration Tour that we are hosting with the Larimer Conservation District. This is on August the 28th, so you can sign up on our website for that. And then our next talk will be on September the 4th. And now I guess without any further ado, I'm gonna turn it over to Karin Emanuelson. She is a river scientist and a restoration engineer. Is that right?
Perfect. Good evening, everyone. Good evening. I'm really excited to be here with y'all. Can everybody hear me in this room? And then can everybody hear me online? I'm gonna assume that's a yes unless Willyn. Awesome. Could it be softer for the folks online?
No.
No, okay, sorry. I'm not yelling at you, I promise. So my name's Karin Emanuelson. I'm a river scientist and restoration engineer, and I work for Stillwater Sciences. Work out of the Fort Collins, Colorado office, so not too far. And of course, we always love to be able to drive up into the mountains and work on great projects with Estes Valley Watershed Coalition. So today, I'm going to talk a little bit about the history of beaver in Fish Creek, why we want beaver in Fish Creek, why we care. And then, like Willyn mentioned, we're going to dive into a project that I've been working on, we all have been working on, right here. And I'll give you a little background, a little purpose, project timeline, and then we'll talk about the implementation that's already happened, some of the adaptive management that's been occurring throughout the years, and then I'll leave you with a few kind of like next steps and key takeaways. And if we have time at the end, I have more beaver videos to share, so plenty to get through today. Now, historically, beaver colonies were found at Lily Lake, along Fish Creek, and in Rocky Mountain National Park. And they were abundant. So what happened? There was trapping, there was grazing, there was logging and human settlement. All of this put a lot of pressure on the beaver populations. And then in places like Rocky Mountain National Park, where some of that was protected, they still were dealing with, they being the beaver, overgrazing by ungulates like elk and now moose. And so this kind of decimated the willow habitat that they need to survive and thrive. And so their population numbers came down. The project site we're going to be looking at, I kind of pulled up an example. And so this is from 2005. I'm sorry, I'm going to use the pointer on the screen so folks online can see too. But you can see even just back in 2005, right here along Fish Creek Road, this is on the Cheley Camp property, there were beaver dams all throughout Fish Creek. So why do we want beavers on the landscape? Can anybody, I'm gonna welcome some participation. Yes, in the back.
They purify the water because the water slows up, allowing the sediment to settle, and they also lessen evaporation.
So I'll clump that into water quality. Yes, it settles out fine sediment. It also recharges the floodplain, and so many different, we call those biogeochemical reactions happen in that saturated soil. So nitrogen and phosphorus cycling, carbon storage, all of that is absolutely correct. Anybody else have any ideas? Willen?
To align the best hydro engineers and to reconnect the water table.
Yep, so hydro engineers and reconnect to the water table. Why do we want a higher water table? Yes,
Create riparian areas.
absolutely, riparian areas. There's probably more ideas. Anybody have one or two more? Yeah?
They create check dams, so the flooding doesn't blow out the valley.
Absolutely. I call that attenuate flood flows. They slow everything down. Now, there's many more, but I'll keep going. I won't put you on the spot much longer. So, like we said, they increase the water table. So a stream with beavers over here, you can see the water table's all the way full right to the ground surface. You might witness that by stepping in there and getting your shoe wet. But the vegetation is also relying on that surface flow to grow and be healthy. So when we have drought conditions and that groundwater kind of locally might depress, in these areas, the vegetation's still thriving. It's still able to be green, be resilient. So that's really important when we start thinking about fires. So if a fire comes through an area with a lot of healthy vegetation, nothing burns. It's green, it's moist, it's resistant to that, especially a high intensity fire. However, a stream without beavers, that riparian vegetation is much more dependent on the groundwater table. So in drought conditions, when groundwater goes down, that vegetation dies out. And then in fire conditions, if a fire were to roll through that area, that dry vegetation is really easily ignitable. So quite a few researchers and scientists have really studied the effects that beaver have on the landscape. And one of the most famous researchers in this area, her name's Emily Fairfax, and she put together this really awesome stop motion video. So I'm gonna play that for you right now. That kind of depicts exactly what a beaver dam does. Now, in real life, that might look like the picture we have on the screen here. This is also from her work, where post-fire, you see these areas kind of light up in this lush green sense, while the surrounding area is really burnt. And so I talked about it being, these beaver meadows being resistant to high severity burns. That's why the vegetation was able to rebound so quickly. But it also helps out the wildlife. So during the fire, wildlife have a place to go to escape the fire. And then after the fire, wildlife have a place to go that's still a thriving ecosystem, so they can get water and food, everything else they need to be able to survive post-fire. Now, we talked about flood attenuation after fires in particular. When it rains, that rain kind of goes straight to the creek. All of that vegetation that normally would take that water up and use it for evapotranspiration, it's not there anymore. So it goes straight to the creek, and we tend to have kind of higher and faster floods after a big rain event. But when those big storms come through, like we always have, you know, a big afternoon thunderstorm, all that water goes to the creek, it goes downstream, and when it hits an area like this, it slows down. It just takes a minute, and it kind of diffuses, it gets jammed up in all of these dams, and then it slowly leaks out a little bit after that initial peak. And so that's really important. I'm sure many of you in this room experienced the 2013 flood, and we have a really good understanding of how devastating that can be for the whole watershed. So maybe one beaver dam isn't going to stop flooding, but when we have them in a whole watershed as these little checks and balances, we really do slow that big flood pulse to a more manageable level for the rest of the watershed. We also deposit out sediment. So same with post-fire, again, the vegetation's gone, the water hits the ground, and it picks up more sediment now because it's not hitting, you know, green grass or anything else. It's not being intercepted. And so it brings that sediment with it to the stream. Now, fine sediment can bring all sorts of, you know, naturally occurring things that end up really polluting our water. Again, nitrogen, phosphorus, even organic carbon. And so in this fine sediment, it comes down to the stream, it gets held up in all these dams, and it finally has time to settle out to the bottom. With that, it takes all the pollutants it brought with it, and then it naturally cleans up the water as it releases downstream in a much slower setting. So that's a really important thing post-fire that these beaver meadows also provide us with. Now beyond that, even if we don't have a fire, we still love beaver meadows, okay? It helps with drought, it helps with flood, it helps with fire. It just provides a diverse landscape that's able to kind of adapt with climate change and everything else. Urbanization, it gives all of the wildlife great habitat to live in and thrive. And of course, it also stores carbon. So it pulls it out of the water and the air, and it puts it into the ground, reducing the CO2 in our air. So that was a little bit of the histories of beaver on Fish Creek. We have a lot less of them now. And so that's where Estes Valley Watershed Coalition and Stillwater and a few of our team members come in, and we looked at this same beaver meadow that I showed you before with all those historical dams on Cheley Camp property. Now this is what it looks like in, I believe, 2016. Now I still see two kind of beaver ponds, but that's nothing compared to the 9 or 10 different ponds that were there back in 2005. Now we'll get into why, but that's what brought us all together. So Stillwater Sciences was looking at restoration and engineering consulting. We teamed with Johnson Environmental, who is helping us with the revegetation and the permitting of this project. Of course, Jeff Cheley was a very important part of the project. He allowed us to work on the land and he was excited to support our work. And then of course we need funding. So we got funding from the Colorado Water Conservation Board as well as the Bureau of Reclamation initially. plus many others, but those were the two primary funders at the beginning of this project. So, I wanted to do a little comparison. Pre-flood, we have a big green bead in this meadow. Post-flood, it's not quite as green. There's a lot less willow there. And something I really noticed is that you can actually see the stream, whereas pre-flood, it was surrounded by vegetation on both sides, so it was hard to really like trace the exact path. And I'll do that for you right now. It actually came here and went this way and down through. All of this vegetation was supported partially by a tributary, as well as these big beaver dams that were put in to spread the water out and recharge the groundwater. So you might notice my labels. We have pre-2013 flood and post-flood in 2016. And so this is another example of one of the impacts of that 2013 flood. I probably don't need to tell you guys this. There's 9.3 inches of rain that fell in September in 2013. All around the Front Range experienced like historic flood events. And right here, it was no different. Again, zooming in to our restoration site that we'll kind of use today, Fish Creek, which is I'm sure you guys are familiar, a tiny little creek, almost a trickle. It jumped out of its banks and down Fish Creek Road and spilled all sorts of sediment all over the place. Huge flood, a little creek can become monstrous and really cause issues, especially, blowing out a roadway is hazardous to everybody that lives on either end of it. So what happened next was that Larimore County said, we gotta get this stream off the road. And I agree with them. So they came in and they cut an emergency channel that redirected the channel from its historical alignment over here back to connecting to what kind of became the post-flood alignment, which was down here. Now, the path from here to here is much longer than the path from here to here. And so when we do that to streams, when we straighten them, they tend to start cutting down. Now, sometimes that's okay, but in a lush wetland area where it was super connected to its floodplain, when a stream cuts down, it no longer can provide all of those great resources that we looked at in that first figure with that high groundwater where it's almost surface water. And so this is kind of a depiction here of this stream being able to support all of this lush vegetation versus it being straightened, it cutting down vertically. We call that incising. And it's no longer able to support the same vegetation because that water level is just so much lower. So the roots can't reach it anymore. So that was the first thing that happened. This emergency channel got cut. And people recognized pretty quickly as the meadow started to dry out, this was maybe a problem. We wanted that meadow to stay there, and that was a really important, it was providing really important ecosystem benefits to us. So our restoration project came in. They used what we call simulated beaver structures. That means somebody like me goes in and pretends to be beaver, building up little dams and trying to back up water, using usually pretty similar materials that beaver actually use. So some sediment and natural stream bed material, lots of willows and wood to kind of like build up this, it's a mimic of what the beaver do much better than we can. And that occurred, I believe, in 2018. And this is a photo of it. And so you can see there's little beaver dams there and there and there and there and there. However, the dams just got to the top of the channel, but they weren't able to spread the water out like a real beaver would, beyond just the channel extent. So they like filled up the bathtub, but they didn't let it overflow. Now beavers wouldn't have settled for that. They like it to overflow, they want that lush vegetation, they know how to grow some willows, that's what they're after. And unfortunately, after this restoration project took place, there was no more funding, nobody was really paying attention, they said we did our job, and they moved on. So many years later, Estes Valley Watershed Coalition still looking at this meadow going, it's really not that meadow that we envisioned. And so they went back out, they got more funding, they put together that initial project team I was just talking about, and we had this restoration goal. Restore the beaver meadow complex on Fish Creek at Cheley Camp by using these simulated beaver structures. They were going to be installed into the channel. It would help stop that channel incision and erosion, and it would lead to this aquatic and riparian habitat. So we came here and we did some analysis, and Brad Johnson of Johnson Environmental was with us. He was looking at vegetation. We all put our heads together, and our initial plan was, that is awesome. We are going to fill the emergency channel that was cut as a temporary fix to get Fish Creek off the road. And we are gonna realign it back to its historical alignment. While doing this, we were gonna spread water out and add lots of SBSs to try to get back to the state that we were originally at. Now, we were thinking, what happens when the next flood comes in? And we had all sorts of different modeling and analysis that we were gonna do to make sure that Fish Creek didn't just jump back onto the road. However, Larimer County, in the time from the flood to when we got this project, adopted new floodplain regulations. And unfortunately, that meant we could not realign the channel. The floodplain permitting process is pretty extensive, and with the original kind of budget that we had drummed up for this project, there just wasn't a way to make it happen. So we pivoted. We said, all right, we're not deterred by that. What can we do here right now to help this ecosystem out? So instead, we went through this phased implementation approach, and we said, let's adaptively manage this. Let's learn from what we put on the ground and keep coming back so that we can keep addressing what's working or what's not working, and not do what that previous restoration project did, which was just come, implement something, and kind of walk away. We also, in order to learn from what we've done, we needed to monitor. We really wanted to know, like, from a scientific perspective, if what we were doing was actually working. So we said, all right, we have enough budget to do all of those things. We focused on this first restoration area right here because there was a lot of opportunity. The water currently was draining right back to the creek through this one channel, but with a little bit of handwork, we were able to spread water out in this whole area and actually, like, keep it on the surface or recharging the groundwater all the way back to this area right here. Now, with the floodplain permitting, there's certain areas we can work and there's certain areas we can't. So we couldn't work within the 100-year water surface elevation. That's something that FEMA sets. But this whole area was outside of that. So they had no problem with us coming in and doing good work here. So it's kind of the best of all the worlds. Now, we didn't forget about what we wanted to do. We said, let's learn how to do this area really well. We'll keep coming back and adding more. In the meantime, let's go find funding so that we can go through the whole permitting process and ultimately address this whole meadow. So we kind of took one little step while also planning for the bigger next step. Oops, I kind of got to this already. But the work outside the 100-year floodplain, what it looked like is we actually patched these historical beaver dams. The beaver at the time was living up here in a lodge, and he was maintaining this pond. It was just a single beaver at the time, so we weren't expecting him to really expand his complex, because he just, didn't have enough help. We constructed some SBSs in this wetland area, and then we also kind of encouraged flow anytime it wanted to go back to the creek, instead to stay on that floodplain. So this, I say cut flow paths, that looks like me and my weak arms actually just like digging a tiny little dent, because we're just spreading water. So it's not like a channel, it's really just us saying, oh, there's this little hump you can't get over, let's relieve you of that. And so it kept spreading water as far as we could. The other thing, if you remember, I talked about elk and moose kind of coming into the beaver habitat and making it harder for them to survive. We said, well, we could fence it off. We know we have a lot of elk and moose in the area, and we could see on the actual willows on our site that it kept getting chewed down. And so there's this competing thing where the ungulates were coming in and eating, and the beaver are trying to grow the willow as tall as possible. And they need a lot of willow for all their building materials. So, as Willin mentioned, in 2018, we had this initial restoration project. We got awarded the funds in 2021. I won't have you read all of this. In 2022 through 2023, we did this first phase of implementation. And then in 2023 to 2025, right now, really, we're working on both monitoring and adaptive management. Now, a really cool aspect of this project is while sometimes I was out there digging these little pilot channels, mostly we were using volunteers. And it wasn't just one community group that kept coming out. This was a full range of volunteers, all ages, all different backgrounds. And we were able, especially because we were doing this kind of longer timeline for our project, to have many opportunities to get different people on site. And it's really fun work, it really is. You get to see, you're ponding up water in real time, and you kind of get to see it working, and then you come back and you see all the veg just being like bright and green, and we're moving from grasses, kind of upland grasses, to these wetland species. So it's just really amazing, and it's really, I think it was rewarding for the people that were out there to be able to get on site and really help their watershed. We have some photos, and you'll see a lot of photos of volunteers moving forward. So I wanted to show a little bit about what this implementation looked like. We did have actually an in-kind donation from Cheley Camp in the initial phase to help us move some dirt. So this was this big channel I mentioned that all of the current beaver ponds on site was just draining back to this kind of degraded in size channel. And so we were able to fill that channel up to create a berm and a pond that then was able to kind of flow out over the rest of that restoration area. So one of our kind of SBS structures really just looked like an earthen berm. Other of our SBS structures looked more like what you may have seen in the past, which we call a willow weave. So we're using just little posts, we're acting like beaver, we're pushing those into the subsurface, and we're getting willows and weaving them through over and over and over again until it starts to seal and back up water. Now, some of those willows actually end up growing right from the stakes that we put in there, while some end up kind of dying off. But either way, they do this really, it's a natural way to build this little willow fence to back up water naturally. And then we planted more willows. So we went out there, we harvested willow stakes, and areas of channel that just didn't have willow alongside of it, we staked out willow to try to like boost that regeneration. So eventually willow would probably have come, but why not give it a little help to come a little sooner? That was our philosophy. And then in 2023, we were able to build this big elk exclosure fencing around pretty much our entire restoration area, plus a little bit more. Again, keeping elk and moose out so that the willows get a chance to really grow back. So that's everything we said. Okay, we're gonna go out and we're gonna do all these things. Then I mentioned adaptive management. So this is kind of the typical adaptive management cycle. We plan for something, we do the absolute best that we can, we go out there, we implement it, and then we evaluate and learn from what we put on the ground. Now, sometimes we just say, we need more. And other times we say, that didn't work so well. Let's try something else. So as you saw in the photos, we didn't use all the same type of SBSs, and we found through our process that one of them actually blew out. And we're like, well, we didn't have willow weed there. Let's go back, we'll recreate our SBS structure, but we're gonna use a different building method. We're gonna use the willow weave that worked really well downstream in this area as well. That's just one example of getting out there, really assessing the work you did, and being open to change and adapt your kind of philosophy and design based on the evidence you see working on that site. Every site's a little different, and it calls for a different recipe. And so we want to be really open to that. Again, more volunteers, get out there with us. We built up this willow weave to be even taller. We found that that pond was great, but we wanted it to spread even more water out. And then this was the area where it was kind of some sandy soil that blew out, so the water went right back to the creek. We went in there and established a willow weave, and it's still holding now today, after, I guess that'd be 2 years. Again, we wanted more plants. Said, okay, we don't have to do too much more, so let's keep planting. We planted in a different area. We planted with, rather than just stakes, even little starters, so small trees really, all donated to the project. And then we looked at that upper pond. That's no more beaver were there, but it was a historical pond. And we said, what if we could spread more water out? So any place where the berm was getting a little bit low, we dug out these sod mats, so this really nice wetland vegetation. We just took a little hole, it grows right back, but we put that sod mat on the berm, and that acted as a really nice, almost like glue to kind of patch the berm where it was missing. You can see this is the transplanted, if you will, sod, just kind of building up the areas where there is a low point. And then these are our vegetation harvesters. Now with adaptive management, we only can learn from things if we monitor them. So as part of this initial phase, we came up with a pretty comprehensive monitoring plan. This is just one table from that plan, but we broke it down into biology, vegetation, hydrology, and then the actual effectiveness of the treatments that we were out there. So ultimately, we want to rejuvenate this ecosystem. That was part of our restoration goals. So I think that's really gets down to biology and vegetation. Is the vegetation coming back? And is it wetland vegetation or is it upland vegetation? If it's upland vegetation, we know the work that we are doing isn't influencing the vegetation we're getting. So that would not be the right kind of vegetation. We also want to look at that woody vegetation that beavers need to thrive. So we want to eventually set this site up so that it can be completely maintained by the beaver. In order to do that, they need food and they need building materials. That's all that woody vegetation. Now, biology, we know we have one beaver on site, and it was in that upper pond. We know we used to have a lot more on site, and we know that there are beaver in the area, so it's possible they could come back on their own. But we won't know that because beaver don't like just come out and say hello to us every time we get on site, unfortunately. So we use game cameras to kind of track their activity, learn about their patterns. It provided another awesome opportunity to get more volunteers on site, maybe that weren't so interested in the restoration side of things, but were really interested in the wildlife side of things. Ultimately, we want to see that the beaver are happy and thriving. We want to see them building more. We want to see them using the woody vegetation. I would love to see a baby beaver out there one day. You know, we want to see, that would be the ultimate metric of success. The hydrology, I mentioned there's a lot of hydrology indicators with vegetation, but also it's very easy when you step out on site to say, are my feet wet? And if the answer is no, you might be doing something wrong. So we want to see the water spreading out over the site that we've treated. We want to see it slowly moving, you know. We want to see the extent of water on site increase. That gives us that super resilient habitat that's going to help us in drought and fire and with flood attenuation. And then the effectiveness of restoration treatment, there is quite, we talked to a lot of people, and there's quite a mixed feeling on if fencing works. That was just one example. And so we went out there and we're looking at veg transects and we're intersecting this data to say where we have fencing, is vegetation getting bigger versus where we don't have fencing? These are just some of the questions we were trying to ask because we want to learn about this so that the next time we do a project, we know what's working and we know what's not, and we can use that money the most effective way. That's the ultimate goal here. So I mentioned we had some trail cameras out there. This was an awesome project by some students from WPI, I think that's Worcester Polytechnical Institute. And so they came out to Estes for the summer and they got to put out game cameras all over the site. They did a great job coming back, checking batteries, checking the memory cards in them, and then going through. The game cameras only trigger when there's activity, but sometimes that's a blade of grass moving. So then they had to kind of filter through, see not just what type of beaver were on site, but also what other animals are using this ecosystem. And they found all sorts of fun things. Coyotes, birds, elk, of course. And I think they had fun doing it. So one of the videos that they provided to us is right here. So this is the beaver. He gets a little sassy with us here, does a tail flip. On the upper pond, so this was the original pond that we knew the beaver was on. They had an active lodge, but through all of their videos, they only ever saw one beaver. And that's actually how we knew there was only one beaver on site. Now there's a little mystery up in the air because you could have two beaver, but if you don't ever see them on the game camera together, you would not know. You know, they don't like wear name tags or anything. But it was really great information for us to have, and it was also just a really fun way to get students involved in this type of work and more involvement on the site. Other monitoring we did, I mentioned we did veg transects. It's a picture of that here. We looked at water temperature. There's a lot of questions about, do ponds increase or decrease, or how does it change the water temperature? So we said, okay, let's find out. You know, let's look at where we've done our work and put them in ponds, in the flow paths. Let's really get to the bottom of this. Now we continued doing our game camera, even after the students left. And finally, we get the answer that we've kind of been hoping for. Now the beaver have moved downstream. They built a brand new lodge. I'll show you a picture of that in a few slides. And we have 2 beaver. Like I said, a lot of other wildlife use this habitat as well. In 2024, we got approached by Colorado Water Conservation Board, who is also interested in doing this type of monitoring work. And so they said, we're looking for restoration sites that we can also monitor. So they wanted to know more about groundwater. How does incorporating beaver, these simulated beaver structures, impact groundwater? Does it refill it? Does it drain it? Does it really slow down the water? All of these kind of more scientific questions. Yes?
Before you move on, what did you find out about the temperature?
We don't have enough data to like say anything conclusively, but what we've kind of seen is we do not believe that it increases the temperature of Fish Creek. We see that like maybe on the surface of the water increases slightly, but because these ponds are deep, they have like pockets of really cold water. So on the system as a whole, I would say this is kind of what we thought to begin with. It's not impacting water temperature very much, but when you zoom into our restoration site, you can see that there's colder pockets, which fish really like and is pretty important for fish. And so there's more like diversity of water temperatures throughout our site. So CWCB hired Joel Schultes, and he established stream flow gauging on the upstream and downstream end of our site. He did a bunch of surveying of our site to get water surface extents, to fly drones, just to really monitor how the site's changing from year to year. And he installed groundwater wells with loggers in it, also with water temperature. So we can see how the stream water compares to the groundwater and if there's interactions happening there as well. More photos from this is the downstream. So prior to us knowing that there were 2 beavers on site, we did have a few signs. The beaver all of a sudden moved downstream and built this natural, elaborate jam. And so we were like, that beaver got really busy all of a sudden. I don't know if he was a bachelor or a bachelorette, but I like to think he wanted to spruce up the place, you know? They built a new lodge down there, and they were very active as compared to the last few years where they were really just maintaining. It seemed like all of a sudden there were new ponds and new dams showing up. This is one of the new dams, and so we were kind of just measuring it. We're in this picture here, I'm actually trying to measure how much sediment has been building up to quantify how much of that fine sediment is settling out. So these were all things that we were monitoring. I kind of already mentioned the treatments. I don't think we have enough time span quite yet to understand the fencing, although anecdotally, we can see there's less, just like munching of the top of the willows, so it does seem like the fence is keeping out some of those pressures. And so, yeah, and we also we were also looking at the restoration treatments, and we were kind of adapting there, like what's working and what's not. So for us, the next steps in the immediate future are starting to work a little further downstream. Now, we're not walking away from the site at Cheley Camp, but we've had so many people on site, and we've really kind of fostered some community support for this type of work. And so a different landowner where work had been done previously, I believe also in 2018, reached out to us and said, hey, I see you're doing work up there. Can you come back to my property? You know, a few things have blown out. I feel like we could do some more work and get this even better. So this is downstream of that Cheley Camp property, and I believe this year we're setting up monitoring to get pre-project data, because we want to continue this trend of really learning from our projects and not just doing this one and done approach. And then we're going to extend, the black lines are where there had been restoration work done in the past. And so we're adding more SBSs and we're patching the ones where they failed. Like I said, we're not walking away from the restoration site either. We were able to secure the funding to get us through that floodplain process, floodplain permitting. So we're going back to our initial idea, building off now that we have better vegetation up here and a healthy beaver couple down here. And we're gonna try to realign this channel. Primarily, that's gonna help us re-wet this whole aspect of the meadow that's currently kind of high and dry. So that we still felt like everything we learned on site, it was worth doing this a little bit higher intensity project to get the water and increase the size of this wetland. So our key takeaways as we've been working on this project, and we will probably keep adding to these, but we're really seeing the benefits of moving away from this one and done implementation. So we want to try to do more adaptive management and more phased implementation where we can actually expand from just one little project site to starting to get momentum to start thinking about this on more of a system scale. So Beaver used to be all up and down Fish Creek, and so we want to have more properties that we can do this type of work, and we don't want to just come in one day and leave the next. We want to keep at it and keep adapting our process based on what's working and what's not. We also saw how awesome it was to build all of these partnerships. Who would have thought folks from Worcester Polytechnical Institute would come here to Estes and help us learn about the beaver in Fish Creek? There's just so many amazing opportunities, and being able to have a site where you can say yes and foster those opportunities seems invaluable. I kind of already hit on the system-wide. And so I wanted to end, I do have beaver videos if we want to go longer, but with a quote from Jeff Cheley, and just kind of saying his support. He says, Willen in Estes Valley Watershed, as well as Stillwater Sciences, has been a great partner. They've been collaborative and committed and deeply impactful. I'll let you kind of read the rest, but this is what we're striving for. We're striving to actually work with the community and be a part of the community, and also have the community be part of our projects so that we can have this a little bit different mindset to restoration. All right. Beaver videos or questions?
I have one question real quick on that.
Oh, okay.
Karin Edwards said it is her understanding that many beavers were moved out of Estes Park. what happened to those beavers and how come they weren't returned?
I unfortunately don't have a good answer. Do you?
Yes. After the 2013 flood, there's a woman named Tippy, forgot the last name, and many of the beavers actually washed down Big Thompson, but several of them moved into Scott Ponds. And she and me and friends we trapped them, and they were moved to other places in the state. So there aren't any more beavers in Scott Ponds.
And I think that's a good point. Beaver they're called a nuisance species, and there's certain areas where they affect the operation of, our water resources. And so I actually think that's more of a reason to get more beaver meadow restoration projects so that we can create habitat in areas where they are welcome. And we can also really work with landowners on creative solutions on how to keep them where they want them and maybe not let them, dam up a culvert or block their diversion or anything like that. So there's many different techniques out there. Yep.
This is just a funny story. So when the beavers were in Scott Ponds, they had nothing to eat. So I went around collecting aspen and throwing them into the pond. And one day I was driving away and this policeman came and said, "Somebody turned you in, you're trashing out the pond." So I had to wade into the pond and take all the aspen out of there. It's just a funny story.
All right, yes, another question.
Two questions. One is, how do our current dry conditions affect the project right now?
Not really. We're working with the water that's there, and it just hasn't, it slows it down, so it keeps going downstream, but it gives the plants a little bit more time to take it up. And so if anything, I think it's just making use of the water we do have. But we're not noticing a specific impact on drought.
And then the Lily Lake, is that at all going to be suitable ever habitat?
Yeah, maybe. Yeah. I think it's about, it could definitely go back to being suitable habitat, but I think it's about really community involvement and if we want to do work like this to get it there. And so it's complicated. Yeah.
This is sort of an opinion question, but there's, seems like there's two different ways about that people are currently looking at the use of beaver. One is to improve the habitat and hope they come in. And then there are people that believe you go out and you trap beaver and you locate them in there and hope for the best that they're going to do that. And I'm interested in that because I can see both sides of it, but I kind of like the habitat approach and letting them come in, but I'm curious what you think about those ways of thinking about it.
I think both are really important. If you have a site that has all those materials that they need and it's well functioning, then I feel like it's appropriate to release a beaver in that site. And this isn't just in Colorado, in California too, I do some work there. People are really trying to do that more and more and more, especially when beaver are really annoying a landowner. Rather than killing it, we could relocate it, and I think that's an amazing opportunity to keep beaver on the landscape. However, if a site doesn't have what a beaver needs, I think it's really cruel to release it there, really just hope that they'll make it work. So I think it depends on the site conditions mainly. Yes?
I suppose that to be very premature to bring beaver in then before your site is appropriate to do so, right?
Correct.
The other thing is, right now, a lot of work was done downstream after the flood on Fish Creek. And it looks like Colorado and California. So do you think there will be a time that you can get beaver dams all the way down so that Fish Creek could be restored going all the way down towards Lake Estes?
I am an optimistic person, so I say absolutely. But I don't think it's gonna be easy. I think that's really community and landowners. I think we need to prove to a lot of those landowners that there can be this harmonious balance between beaver being on their property. And I think that's a slow and steady process, so I certainly would love to see that.
Please keep doing these programs.
Absolutely. All right, I'll leave you with, I think we have a few moments with, I just have a few more game camera photos. I know you guys came here for the beaver mostly, so I figured I'd leave you guys with this. I'm not sure you can hear it, but he sneezed.
He's busy as a beaver now.
All right, that's all I have for you tonight.
Thank you.